All right, welcome to part 4 of biology. So now that we are talking about biology, now that we've covered your different organelles, you've covered the different parts of the cell, you've covered what a cell is, now we're understanding what happens to create life. So how does energy pass from one place to the next? Photosynthesis is the way plants gain their energy. So I'm sure you've talked about photosynthesis throughout your lifetime in education. Photosynthesis is a way that produces oxygen, gives us the ability to breathe as animals. It is used by heterotrophs as in a way to eat the plant, to gain oxygen, to create cellular respiration. Photosynthesis is called a biochemical pathway. So this is a series of reactions. So photosynthesis is a part of this. That is in which a product of one reaction is consumed in the next reaction. So for instance, photosynthesis produces oxygen. It is consumed by heterotrophs. The same thing with glucose. So light reactions are given to the initial reactions for photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is when energy is absorbed by chloroplasts. Chloroplasts, remember, are your green structures inside of plants. That's what gives them the green tint, the chlorophyll. They have inner membranes stacked that are called thylakoids. These thylakoids connect to form stacks of membranes called grana. So grana is surrounded by a solution called stroma. So as we go through here, our chloroplast stack create thylakoids. Thylakoids are surrounded by the stroma, and then your dome membrane is what allows that light in. So you see your chloroplast structure here. So light and pigments. Light appears white from the sun and but it is made up of many colors. So if you take a prism, you put it against a window, you can see the rainbow. That's why when you have a rainstorm, it uses those droplets as a way of a prism. So that shows us all the visible light on the spectrum. So the resulting colors range from red to violet. These are your visible spectrum. Light travels through space as an energy of wave. We talked about waves when we covered physics. Wavelength is of course, the distance in crests of the waves. So different colors of light have different wavelengths. So your light strikes an object, can be reflected, absorbed, or transmitted by that object. So that is white light. However, sometimes if something contains a pigment, the pigment can absorb particular colors of light. So when we talk about pigments, we'll think about a tan. So when you get a tan, when your skin gets darker, that is absorbing that light and absorbing that color of light, creating a darker skin tone. Color that is not absorbed is reflected away, and that would be a use of sunscreen. So that would not absorb the light, it would reflect it away. So chloroplast pigments. So located in the thylakoids, we have our chlorophyll. So there are different types of chlorophyll. The most common are chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. So there's slightly different structure between the two. It causes them to absorb different colors of light. So chlorophyll A directly involved with the reaction of photosynthesis. Chlorophyll B helps capture the light, therefore is an accessory pigment, meaning that it is not absolutely necessary to photosynthesis. Carotenoids are other accessory pigments that are found in thylakoid membranes. They absorb colors except for yellow, orange, brown, just as an accessory pigment. So this is what you see if you are given this particular diagram. You should be able to pick out what exactly their absorption is. So electron transport, chlorophylls and carotenoids are grouped into hundreds, a couple hundred pigment molecules in thylakoid membranes called the photosystem. There are two types, photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. So these are similar in kind of pigments they contain but perform different roles. So step 1, we're talking about the steps in light reactions. Step 1, a photon of light hits photosystem 2, forces some electrons to a higher energy level. This is excited. This is what we talk about in chemistry. So step 2, the excited electrons have enough energy to leave the chlorophyll molecules. Because of this reaction, they go through oxidation reaction, meaning that oxygen is going to be produced. In order for this to occur, something else must accept electrons that were lost. Primary electron acceptor does this. Step 3, your primary electron acceptor then donates those electrons to a series of molecules called the electron transport chain. So you see how we're trying to get from electrons from our light to point B. The chain reaction passes the electron from one molecule to the next. As they move, they lose energy. So step 4, at the same time light is absorbed by photosystem 2, it is also absorbed by photosystem 1. Chlorophyll molecules move more electrons to a primary electron acceptor. The electrons are lost to the primary electron acceptor are replaced by electrons that come from photosystem 2. So anything that is lost, you replace them. In primary electron acceptor, photosystem 1 donates electrons to a different electron port chain. It brings them all together to the side of the thylakoid and the membrane that faces the stroma. So basically it pushes everything outward. So you absorb it all through, push it all outward. The electrons then combine with a proton, and NADP plus is created, or is also accepted. This is an organic molecule that accepts electrons during the redox reaction. So once it is reduced, it becomes NADPH. Restoring photosystem 2, the electrons that are lost are needed to be replaced, or both electron transport chains will stop. So we have to replace them, and that is provided by the water. So this is how photosynthesis works with the absorption of water in plants. We're getting down to the chemical aspects of it. So an enzyme molecule in a thylakoid splits water into protons, electrons, and oxygen. So we take this water, we take all of it, and we create oxygen. For every 2 water molecules that are split into 4 electrons are available to replace electrons lost in photosystem 2. So this is where water is very important, because we have to make sure we keep the process moving. Think about if you get in a car and you drive 400 miles, you're going to have to replace the gasoline or else you're going to stop. So that's the same thing that happens in the chloroplast. Protons are left in the thylakoid while the oxygen diffuses out and leaves the plant. So think about how we respirate, and we use that oxygen to help us breathe, help us move, help the body be able to repair. The oxygen, we let out carbon dioxide, which is just like what the plant is doing here with the oxygen. So here is your electron transport chain. So basically everything I said is happening here. So your light is absorbed, we push our electrons out, O2 is lost, then we have our chain. This one looks a little bit more complicated, but it is basically the exact same thing. Okay. So chemiosmosis is an important part of your light reactions. So it makes ATP by building up concentration of protons across the thylakoid membrane. This concentration represents potential energy. So remember, we've talked about this in physics. Potential energy is something that has the ability to happen. Kinetic energy is what is moving. So as these protons diffuse back across the membrane, an enzyme of ATP synthase adds a phosphate to ADP and changes it to ATP. This ATP and NADPH from earlier provide energy for the next step of our reaction. So I would suggest clicking on this, going through it, so that way you can see exactly how your photosynthetic electron transport and ATP production works. So the Calvin cycle you saw earlier, so if we look back at this, we see it all equals into the Calvin cycle. So we are moving on to this step. So this is the second set of reactions in the photosynthesis biochemical pathway. So it produces the organic compounds using energy stored in your ATP from the light reactions. It is named after Melvin Calvin. Does not sound like his parents had liked him too much to name him Melvin Calvin, but an American scientist who worked out details of this pathway. So carbon fixation is the term to use for carbon atoms from CO2 being incorporated or fixed in organic compounds. The Calvin cycle has 3 major steps, and we're going to go over them. So number 1, CO2 diffuses into stroma from the surrounding cytosol. An enzyme combines with this CO2 with 5-carbon dihydrate called RuBP2. So the product is a 6-carbon molecule that splits immediately into a pair of 3-carbon molecules called PGA, and not pro-golf association. PGA is converted into 3-carbon molecules called PGAL. Each PGA receives a phosphate from ATP. It receives a proton from your NDPH and releases a phosphate producing PGAL. So in addition to the PGAL, the reaction also produces ATDP and, of course, your phosphate and NADP+. All these products can be used again in the next light reactions. So this is how we use carbon dioxide, how a plant uses carbon dioxide to continue the use of photosynthesis. So number 3, PGAL is converted back into RuBP in a series of reactions. Because RuBP is made again, the Calvin cycle can continue. So it takes 3 turns of the Calvin cycle to produce 3 carbon molecules for a simple sugar, so glucose. So in order for this, you have to make this. It uses 9 molecules of ATP and 6 molecules of NADPH. So this is our equation for photosynthesis. So you take CO2, H2O, and light energy to create glucose and oxygen. We talk about this process in chemistry as well, but it is much simpler because we break everything down to this. And there's your Calvin cycle. So the Calvin cycle is the most common way for carbon fixation. Plants that exclusively use Calvin cycle fix carbon known as C3 plants because it makes 3 carbon molecules. Plants that use other methods can use other ways of that. In hot, dry climates, because you don't have any water, you have to do alternate pathways. In those climates, the plants can rapidly lose water through openings, that is the stomata. Because of this it also has openings that allow more CO2 in and H2O or O2 out. The levels of CO2 decrease in the plant, and the level of O2 rises. So this inhibits carbon fixation through the carbon cycle. So this means that we have to do a different way. Plants have evolved ways to deal with this problem. That is why we call it a C4 pathway. This allows plants to fix carbon into a 4-molecule carbon. A 4-carbon molecule, sorry. These plants can take low levels of CO2, convert it into 4-carbon molecule, and then transport it to another cell where CO2 is released later into the Calvin cycle. C4 plants are corn, sugarcane, crabgrass. That's why in the summertime you'll see your nice green grass turn more into your crabgrass because you're getting less water. Sugarcane and corn are very popular cash crops because they are able to do this. They can survive the summer heat in the south without having a lot of water around. All right, so C4 plants are these. So CAM pathway is another way plants can combat the high dry climates. This pathway, the plant keeps their stomata closed during the day and open during the night because the cooler, it loses less water. So these would be what you see more often in desert climates. During the night, plants take in CO2, fixes it into a variety of compounds. The next day, it releases the CO2 so the Calvin cycle can work. These plants grow very slowly. So when you go into the desert, you do not see very tall trees. You see very slow growing cactuses, like cacti, sorry. Rate of photosynthesis. The rate of photosynthesis is affected by the plants in the environment. Let's see. Got 3 more slides. All right. So there are 3 things that affect the rate of photosynthesis: light intensity, level of CO2 and temperature. Light intensity will change the rate of photosynthesis. So if you have more light, that means there is going to be more excited electrons. There becomes a point at which all the available electrons are excited. Therefore, there is a limit to how much light intensity will increase photosynthesis. So even if you are able to grow something on the surface of Mercury, there is a limit to where the light actually helps. And so levels of CO2 can increase the rate of photosynthesis just as light can, but it also reaches a plateau. CO2 won't increase anymore at a certain rate. Temperature, raising the temperature will increase the rate at which the chemical reaction takes place. So that's why you see plants grow faster in like greenhouses. More light, more temperature, able to keep in that CO2 better. So at a certain point, temperature gets too high of a rate for photosynthesis, starts decreasing that, and will eventually stop. So you see your light intensity graph. You can also make a graph for your carbon and for your temperature to decide what this works. All right, so now you need to take your quiz for photosynthesis. We'll do, once you have done 7 out of 10, you'll move on. You will then do your section 5. So section 5 is going to be cellular respiration. All right, good luck on your quiz.